welcome back to this week's meeting of esteemed gentlemen. Before I start the meeting again, I just want to take this opportunity to ask you to head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show. If you like what we're doing and you want us to do more, it's a great way for you to support us. Help us spread the nefarious agenda that we have and keep this steam engine moving. I'm going to bring us back in now and gavel the meeting back to order. When we left off, Greg was about to sound off about his thoughts on the Night Stalker, his time in LA, his name, and his pop culture status. All right, that's a lot to handle there, Star Child. We're going to start you on the clock, and we want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, that, hit on all of the, big ticket issues right there, I think. But again, going back to, how it represents the age, you also had the 80s, which was, I would say it was a little bit of a carryover from the 70s, but it was about the persona. It was about the alter ego. I don't want to put, Boy George and Culture Club and this particular serial killer in the same point, but we are talking about that. We are talking about taking on a persona, not necessarily a cult of personality, but taking on a persona. I mean, as soon as you get a nickname, like they're not even calling you by your name, and the nickname stuck more than your actual name, and they make it a point to sound cool. Like they didn't just throw out Zodiac, they didn't just throw out Son of Sam, like they're really creating a persona. I think that's when all of us kind of chimed in when we were kids. It was almost to the point where you had to be reminded that, no, these are bad guys. Even though they had a cool name and they had a cool alter ego and people were putting them on T-shirts by the time that this came around. So it's interesting you make the rock star comparison because, yeah, they were on shirts, and I think this was the official start of that. I mean, we all remember the Manson shirt that came out like later on and into the 90s, but Night Stalker, that was a cool patch on your jean jacket. So we're really talking about a time where we're starting to cultivate that because that's what was happening in popular culture. Like honestly, let's be honest, if he hadn't gotten caught, I guess if he really wanted to, be the 80s, he would just throw on an orphan, because it's the 80s. What do you do? Throw in an orphan. Like it was that. I think he, for me, was probably the first one that everyone really tried to make into that sexy Ziggy Stardust serial killer. And the fact that, like he was in Los Angeles actually just makes it better. The way he cultivated his look, I mean, all of the black, the hair, the sunglasses, even the bad teeth to a certain degree, all of that, fit into that persona. So we are also talking about, and they touch on this in Natural Born Killers, where it's like, now, if you're going to be a serial killer, you can't just half-ass it. You need a marketing guy. You need a publicist.
You need an Instagram account.
You need an right, exactly. Like I feel like he was the first, because it definitely wasn't Son of Sam. Just go from Son of Sam to Ramirez, and you already have just a shift in what we're going to do with our serial killers from this point on.
That's pretty fascinating. I mean, I got to say that, I hadn't even thought about that part of it. And, you're right about the image, right? He knew how to work his image as well as anyone did, as anyone did in LA, because he didn't always flash the teeth. Like there were times he tried to be the brooding bad boy. And he had those high cheekbones. So we're going back to, like you say, Ziggy Stardust. And he did have those high cheekbones. And those are, that they have that attractive quality. He's got the dark hair, the kind of dark bad boy look. And he definitely tried to cultivate that. Sometimes he did flash the teeth just to scare you a little bit, right? Like, in those things. And he'd kind of come out with the outbursts of Hail Satan and what have you. But yeah, he really did love writing that. But frighteningly enough, as you say, he could back it up. Like he wasn't just doing it completely for show, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
he was really trying to, in that way, he wanted to personify this, right? He wanted to live up to the persona that he had earned, right, as the Night Stalker.
And it also, I mean, they say, to a certain degree, serial killers also want to be caught because psychopaths subconsciously want to be caught. I think in his case, for him, it definitely had to come down because while you're hiding in corners, while you're evading the police, you can't really glow, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't really be that Elton John equivalent of a serial killer that you want to be while you still have to hide from capture.
Yes.
Like it's true. Like it's to blossom as a serial killer, you have to be out. You have to be like this said to me that from this point on, there has to be an element of spectacle to being a serial killer.
He seemed to want, it was unclear because it's also, we associate him with LA, but don't forget, he also killed in San Francisco. Like he killed several people in San Francisco, and the case is tied together during the same period of time. So he's traveling a long distance. I've lived in California. I've made that drive. It's a long drive. It's a pleasant
drive. Yeah.
Yeah. It can be a pleasant drive, but it's a long drive, right? It's not just you got to plan it out. Well, stayed there for a while.
The funny thing is a couple things. One, I sort of differ in the sense that I don't think he actually really ever wanted to get caught. I think for him, he was sort of believing he was living a rock star life without being able to play an instrument or sing anything whatsoever. He was creating that, and he was getting it. That's the worst part. He was getting the sort of feedback that a rock star would get during that time. Limited exposure, but the exposure you have is meteoric. What's crazy is I'm looking at the timeline of a lot of his killings. I lived about 20 minutes away from it during that time, and I'm trying to think what my parents were even saying or doing. And I'm here to tell you, and I'll ask my older siblings, no one in the Black community was worried about this guy. And that's the thing about the United States that I've always found hilarious is that when serial killers are going out, it's not that Black people are feeling like they're immune. It's like, look, I got the cops. I got other races, white people. I got the government. I got all these different things that are going to kill me. I ain't worried about this idiot. So my parents never brought it up. They're never saying like, hey, we got to get home before a certain time because the Night Stalker's out there. They're kind of like, fuck this dude. He ain't coming near us.
Well, yeah, and for that, it's always important to remember that in the story of the African American, the villain is without a question European Americans. So if you're going to say, hey, little black boy, what should you be worried about? Yeah, there are absolutely other things. But and there have been Black serial killers,
There have.
One to date, and it was Lee Malvo. I just looked at it, but it wasn't so much little black boy be worried. It was grown Black people with families being like, I don't give a shit about any of this. We're not even talking about this. And I hear you with the European thing. It's a little bit more verbose than that, but at the same time, I'm just pointing out in 1985, living in Pomona, which is down the street from LA, not one mention or anyone caring about Richard Ramirez.
He killed in Pomona, didn't he?
Yeah,
I thought. He killed someone in Pomona, and
it's important.
That's what I'm saying. Pomona is so close to LA.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
you know that you live there.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to just point out one interesting thing about the community, and you of course, speaking of living not far from there and being part of the Black community. Interestingly enough, though, he was caught by the Latinx community. Right, he was chased through the streets by the community that was his birth. And they were at the time, the footage there, people were quite proud of themselves. They were really quite happy they caught him. They were very happy and they were very proud that they were the ones that got him. It was just a very interesting thing. So I'm saying they, meaning the people who did it at the time.
Well, think about it this way too. It's who has the most incentive of catching a man who's a serial killer with the last name Ramirez?
Yeah. It's an interesting question,
No, I just wanted to point out, like, there have been more than one Black serial killer. I think Samuel Little was actually, he confessed to something like over 90.
Just
serial
recently, yes. And
Yeah, and
yeah.
he recently died, I think.
And
So
I
there
did,
have been,
True.
but
yes.
but it, you know, and there have been others and other black mass murderers. But if we're talking about who really gets this pinned on their chest, obviously it's European Americans.
By and large, yes. By and large,
Yeah,
it's
by
the
and
more
large.
common. It's the more common. And I didn't go into the Atlanta child murders, you know, which does have elements of this as well. And you know that's
Absolutely.
the 80s as well. But you know that's you know it is one of those things that when we're going through true crime, you know, I did kind of want to try and keep our focus to a certain extent because it's a fascinating subject, as I said. Right, there's hundreds of podcasts on it. There's so you know people will talk about it endlessly. So I wanted to take our own touchstones on it, as I say, talk about the zeitgeist, talk about popular culture. So then leading us into the 90s, we get to a couple of things convening together. We have Silence of the Lambs, you know, topping theaters, scaring the shit out of people. Right? Actually, one of the movies I remember being in a cold sweat in that movie. There are very few movies that have gotten me like that's when that scene where he escapes and they come in and they find the dude crucified and disemboweled. That truly scared me. I was just like, you know, you knew something like that was coming. So great piece of filmmaking there, right?
It's Jim Pembroke, damn it.
That's exactly.
Jim Pembroke.
The fact that he ripped his face, everything. I mean, just you kept me in the grips, right? The whole thing. You know, just a wonderful, you know, performance. But we have this. So we have this.
I'm crying over you.
There's just how else could you ever look at that again, right? Would you fuck me? I'd fuck me.
Bird fuck me so hard.
You know, it's messed up, and I'm willing to bet my dad wasn't the only one, but my dad loved Hannibal Lecter so much. He was rooting for him throughout the whole movie. And I'm looking at him like, yeah, this is what happens when you're a black man who were born in the 40s and you grow up and all you care about is just seeing a couple other people get it.
Right. So, but that movie, you know, brings us to, of course, Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Which again encapsulates these things going on. Suddenly we have fear that we're all fucking eating each other, right? Once again, somehow amongst, and I'll go back to European Americans. I'm fine putting that in. White guys. We're terrified now that we're going to get eaten and that gay men are going to make us have sex that we don't want to have, right? That's definitely, which goes, right? Because you have the two killers in there. You have Hannibal Lecter who's eating people, and you have Buffalo Bill who wants to transform himself and become Buffalo a woman. Bill. Based on Ed Gein, really going back, who, you know, that in and of itself is another story we could delve into for hours. But this idea of, you know, what are we doing with this, and this fear, right? This absolute fear of the other, right? Coming in from that thread, going all the way back to the 60s, tearing us up through the 80s, right? You know, it's like, well, it's the hippies, it's right, it's the hippies, it's the Satan worshipers, and now it's the gay guys, right? And they want to harm us, they want to have sex with us against our will, and they want to kill us and eat us, right? And we have, you know, from the quiet guy, right, from the suburbs of Wisconsin, we get the nightmare that is Ted Bundy. Sorry, not Ted, but I'm sorry, Jeffrey Dahmer. Skipping around on my nightmares here, right? It was Jeffrey Dahmer.
Kind of the same person.
They have some definite similarities to him. I would go as far as the unattractive of the sort of like shrug, like this guy never really turned any heads in that respect. And he was the quiet guy in high school. He didn't have much going on. Something though, when it comes to cases where he should have been stopped, where something should have been done, and was reported. Dahmer raped his roommates when he was in the army regularly, routinely. The men that were assigned to live with him ended up raped, which is an absolutely terrible thing. A few of them actually reported